Alright, let's begin. Just to quickly speed run, showcasing all the factories, because I only showed how they properly recycled everything. So for the glyph factory, it's creating, whenever it's called, it will create a glyph given with these criteria, and then it will initialize it with that data. So here, this is called by the sprite sheet, if I'm not mistaken. So this is called by the spreadsheet here. So that's when this factory is used. The bullet factory, it passes in the position and the blaster for it to spawn in. And then it calls the initialize. So this is where the initialize is. And this is called by the blaster here, whenever it can successfully fire. For the blaster factory, this returns a reference of the blaster for the player manager. So here's where we create it. We don't have any parameters for it, and then we just initialize it with all of its details. This is called, like I said, by the player manager. It's called whenever we start the game and whenever we swap players. For the mushroom factory, this is initialized with the row, column, and the grid that is trying to be placed in. So we initialize it here, pass in all the data, and this is called in by the grid. Right. It's called in by the grid, and it's also called in by the centipedes for whenever they get destroyed by a blaster or by a bullet. Excuse me, not a blaster. It's also called by the grid. By the flea when it successfully passes its check to spawn a mushroom. Next up is the text blockers. This is called by the grid so that it knows where text is on the screen. The factory itself takes in a position and a grid, and then it will initialize itself through here. The explosion factory has 3 different types of explosions it manages. It manages small, medium, and small, big, and mushroom. So this is called by a few different classes, but all of them require just the position that it was exploded in. So if I just pull in the position initialize, create big explosion. So the big explosion initialize, we have this one here. The mushroom explosion, we have this initialize here. And then finally, small explosion, we have the initialize here. And I forget if I did big explosion. So big explosion was this one. Yeah, come on, initialize. Here it is. So that's the explosions. For the high score display, or the spider score display, excuse me, this is called in by the spider spawner for whenever we need to send points in for the spider. So whenever that happens, we get it in the value, the distance from the centipede, distance from the player, blaster, and the spider. That distance will determine which number it displays. So if we go back to here, the initialize, see here that its frame is whatever the integer is that got passed in. It's a spider score display. For the spider factory, this is called in by the spider spawner. So the spawner, well, it's created based on with the activated grid. And this will initialize it here. So this is the initialize that we showed in the critter section of my videos. We have the scorpion, which again is called in by its own spawner. See here, it's called in here. Gets the active grid. Then it calls in the initialize function here. For the flea factory, once again, this is called in by the flea spawner right here with the active grid. It will then go to initialize and get in and then initialize itself. The centipede segment factory, both of these creates are called in by the spawner. So we have that create and we have this create. Both of them are called in. through the spawner itself. So we got both of them here. Then we do different initializes based off of whether we are behind a segment or if instead we are behind a head. Then we initialize like this. For the head itself, we have two calls. We have one for the we have one for when there's a head, for, the first heads. We have two of them here. And we also have one for promoted heads, which we have here. So the promoted head will call in this initialize here. And then the first head one will call in this initialize instead. So this one here. And that's everything.